If I could title this video, see, this is the shit I'm talking about, without it being removed from YouTube because of it's titled, I definitely I would title it that way. Wait till you hear what this story is all about. And shout out to Coca 2005 for sending it to me. So this story is coming out of Iowa. I'm not sure exactly what city in Iowa is coming out of, but it is coming out of the state of Iowa. But in this picture, you have a man by the name of Joseph Matthew Smith. And back in 2014, he was pretty much charged and convicted of sexual assault against minors. He's pretty much been labeled as someone who was convicted of sex crimes. Now, here's where the whole thing goes completely straight down the tubes. This individual named by the name of Joseph Matthew Smith is currently, or has been currently, going under a transition, quote unquote. I think by now you're picking up where I'm headed with this. He's going through a transition to identify himself not as a man anymore, but as a woman. Now, here's where it gets even more downright disturbing. Not only is he going through this transition to now identify as a woman, but now that he has fully identified himself as a woman, and mind you, this is a current picture of him. This is a current picture of him. Nothing about this screams woman at all. He still looks like a guy. Not only is he going through a gender change right now and has been deemed himself, and he deems himself as a woman, but now because of that, the state of Iowa can no longer deem him a threat because he no longer identifies as the man who was convicted of the sex crimes. Do you know how dangerous that is? To be honest, none of you should be surprised because this actually happened before. And it happened with somebody who's very, I guess you could say, famous. If y'all remember, a few years ago, Bruce Jenner, when he was identifying as Bruce Jenner, got into an automobile accident in which I believe somebody did die from that. And to escape having to deal with the consequences, he was starting to transition. As a matter of fact, I think he was already starting the transition then, but he sped up the process to turn from Bruce Jenner to quote unquote Caitlyn, but we call him Brucelyn Jenner over here. And because of that, he could not face any of the charges because he no longer identified as a man, and two, as Bruce Jenner the person. He identified now as Caitlyn Jenner. So because of that, they could not get him on those manslaughter charges from that automobile accident. The same thing is happening here with this guy. He committed sex crimes, and now that he has transitioned, or what he considers himself to be a woman, they claim that they can no longer deem him a threat. Do you see why I keep saying that there's a certain sector in the world, at this point, just say the world, that is extremely dangerous? This man, this XY chromosome card carrying biologically born man, committed sex crimes, and all he had to do to get out of it was to quote unquote go through the transition and then claim that he's a woman, and then boom, he's no longer a threat. You see how easy that was for him? But then again, look at him. Also, look at Brucelyn Jenner. Like, this is some wild stuff. This is some wild stuff we're dealing with here. But it also makes me question these court systems, because it has to go through the court in order for something like this to actually go forward. The article reads, the Iowa Attorney General Office is no longer seeking the commitment of a former Midwest Christian Services student convicted of a myriad of sex crimes because the individual now identifies as a woman. Now look at that, Midwest Christian Services. How come every time the Alphabet Academy comes up, something about Christianity comes into play? Hint, hint. Court records show that the state dismissed the application on January 9th. Attorney General spokesman Lynn Hicks wouldn't comment on the reason for the dismissal other than to say an offender's hormone levels are an important part of sustaining an offender's likelihood of recidivism. Sounds just like a bunch of BS at the end of the day. In November, the Storm Lake Times reported that Joseph Matthew Smith, a 23-year-old convicted of molesting fellow MCS student in 2014, was undergoing medical treatment that is needed prior to Smith potentially undergoing gender reassignment surgery. So this person, like I said, was undergoing gender reassignment at the time or around that time that they did this to this person. And they want to allow people who are going through the transition to go into the women's restrooms and think that's going to be okay. Remember that whole thing with the restroom thing a few years ago? And they actually still think that's okay. Look at what this guy just did. He molested somebody. In order to get out of it, he's saying, "Oh, I'm going through the change. I'm transitioning." It was that simple. Smith has received treatment for reassignment over the past 2 years at Newton Correctional Facility. And now notice that the article is now acknowledging or recognizing him as she. Like they don't say he, they say she first expressed. And it said 2 years, for the past 2 years. So let's say it's 2020 now. So for the past 2 years, we're talking about 2018. So this person committed this act when they were not even beginning to transition. This was much later on. They still identified as a man at the time, as far as I know, unless I'm reading something wrong. But like I said, that whole thing just confuses the hell out of me. But they want to take them out of the World Health Organization and replace it with gaming. That confuses me too. I'm going to say he first expressed the desire to get started on transgender classification in October 2017 and started using female pronouns. So it was that simple. Instead of referring to himself as a he then referred to himself as a she. So it's like you got to psychologically get in their head. Don't call me he. Just like that video of that man going off inside of that GameStop. I wish I had did a video on that when that happened. I almost did, but I don't know why I didn't. Where he was saying when the person behind the counter was calling this guy man, and he was a man. I mean, you could look at him and tell. He's like, "It's not man, I'm ma'am. It's ma'am." I mean, all that bass in his voice. Smith has expressed a preference to identify as Josie. You know what's so crazy? I was gonna make fun of this and call him Josephine, and he pretty much laid it out there because Josie is basically short for Josephine. We don't believe we have evidence sufficient to prove Josie Smith has a significant chance of reoffending. Are you sure about that? An Iowa Department of Correction spokesman says Smith was transferred on Saturday to the Sioux City Residential Treatment Facility for transitional release. He did not say when Smith will be released. That's scary enough as it is. Like they are literally about to let someone back out there into the world, all because they are no longer identifying as a man and because they're quote unquote transitioning. That don't mean a thing. He's still going to have the male hormones attached to him. That male DNA is always going to be there, no matter what. Hicks cautioned the public not to overreact to Smith's upcoming release. I don't know if that's going to happen, if they're not going to not overreact to that. Smith will be subject to sex offender registration requirements for the rest of, and they keep calling her, his life, Hicks said, which includes regular meetings with a probation officer and a listing of an attorney general clearinghouse. I'm sure they would rather deal with that than actually having to spend more years behind bars. Quote unquote Josie Smith will be subject to strict sex offender reporting required of those who commit the crimes they did. He will be subject to supervision for the rest of his life. Hicks said notice in the parts where I'm saying his, they're actually saying her. So if you just rearrange the words, just know how crazy this all sounds. Hicks said the Attorney General's office has never encountered a case quite like Smith's. A preliminary report prepared by the state's expert, Dr. Jeffrey Davis, said Smith molested as many as 15 victims, ranging from ages 1 to 13, before being sentenced to prison in December 2015. Listen, I didn't know how many victims this person molested or raped, or however you want to put it, or what the ages were. But learning that, and after hearing this up to this part with the transition and everything, I don't care. This person should not be let back out into the world. I don't care if they have to report to these sex offender meetings or whatever it is they got to do. That's a cakewalk for them. All they got to do is just show up and report and say that they was there. But what's to stop this from? And see, the thing is, if this person gets a transition good enough, they will not be able to identify who this person is. Like, I have no words. Like, this person sexually assaulted and molested children, and multiple children, over a dozen children. And they're going to let this person out of jail because they don't feel like a man anymore. Transitioning from a man to a woman, or however you want to put it, does not change the fact that this person still committed these acts, these heinous acts against children. That doesn't change the fact. All they did was they're changing their name, and they're changing what they would like to be called. That's it. The report found the likelihood of reoffending within 5 years of release exceeded 20% because victims were of both genders, and because Smith was under the age of 25 and never had a long-term relationship. Mr. Smith had not had an intimate relationship, the report says. Now, this makes it even more sick. So you mean to tell me that the first time that this individual ever had a sexual encounter with anybody was with one of the little children he molested? And again, I say, they want to put this back out into the world. Are you hearing me? Are you hearing this right now? Excuse me. They said his sexual encounters appeared to have primarily involved molestation, including his own molestation by multiple perpetrators or his victimization of others. It seems to me not only does this person need to be in jail, but they also need some psychiatric treatment to deal with whatever it was they were dealing with before they started to lead this life of debauchery. But that still doesn't change the fact that they're allowing this person to go back out into the world. I'm still stuck on the fact that it said their first sexual encounter, which means when they lost their virginity, was to a child. The report says Smith was molested repeatedly as a child in Louisiana starting at the age of 7. So that's probably where it all began. The report recommended Smith be confined at the Cherokee Civil Commitment Unit for sex offenders in Cherokee for an indefinite period, but it was premised upon Smith having the sex drive of a man, which would be true because at the end of the day, at the root of it all, he is a man. Dr. Tracy Thomas, a forensic psychologist and former clinical director of CCUSO, said the statute that outlines civil commitment requires the state to essentially prove an offender has a chance of offending greater than 51% for the rest of his life. That becomes harder to prove when an offender significantly lowers his testosterone levels, which has a significantly higher impact on sex drive than estrogen. You know what all of that's saying? You know what that basically is saying? That it's more likely that a man will molest a child or anybody faster than a woman could. They must not be aware of all of these female teachers who are estrogen filled, who are out here having threesomes with their minor students. Because don't get me wrong, I would say that it's probably just as many men out here that's molesting than there are women, but to make it seem like it's just men doing it, or just mainly more and more men than it is women, that's blasphemous. Because we know that women out here have a very high sex drive themselves. Social media has helped expose that. But they're basically saying, well, all he's doing is transitioning and he's taking the testosterone out and replacing it with estrogen, and that's going to slow it down. No, it's actually not going to. It's really not. This is a get out of jail free card for this individual. But what's scary is the fact that there's going to be more and more people that's going to try to do this to get out of doing something or being in that position. Like 15 victims ages 1 to 13. But see, because it happened under the name of Joseph Matthew Smith and not the name Josie Smith, that's why they're letting him out. From an evaluator's standpoint, our recommendation is based on whether someone is more than likely to reoffend. Thomas said on Monday, between 5% and 15% of sex offenders reoffend. So it takes an extraordinarily high burden to prove someone has a 51% chance. I cannot with this story. So, like, sometimes when I get stories like this, I be hoping that they're not real and that they are just hoaxes that someone just found somewhere. But this is indeed real. So let's run this from the top. 2014, this person by the name of Joseph Matthew Smith, or formerly known as, molested 15 individuals ages 1 to 13, was in jail since 2015, but decided to undergo treatment, gender reassignment, no longer identified as he, but now as she, goes by Josie Smith now instead of Joseph Matthew Smith. And they're going to release them, or if they haven't already, because now he identifies as a woman. And according to this, Josie Smith did not molest these kids. It was Joseph Matthew Smith, even though they are the same goddamn person. No matter how much they like to say that this person has reassigned themselves or renamed themselves, or however you want to put it, all they'll get is being put on the sex offenders list, and that's about it. Take these estrogen pills or whatever, these shots or whatever, lower your testosterone levels, and I'll guarantee, their words, that you will not reoffend again. BULLSHIT exclamation point. We know what that spells. That's what this is. This is a bunch of the word I just spelled in all caps, bolded. This has to be one of the weirdest, wildest, and most dangerous stories I have read so far this year, and it's only January 31st. Of course, it'll be in February by the time this video gets uploaded. I cannot believe what I just read. Some of you probably cannot believe what you just heard. But you know what? This is not going to be this isn't going to be a good look for the T class under the Alphabet Academy, because this is not a good look for them, because all they're going to say is, now you're just going to have someone in your community that is a sex offender who did this, and for them to get out, and their get out of jail free card was to reassign their gender just so they wouldn't have to spend any more years in prison. Like I said, this person started to do this transition a couple years after they were already in jail. They were in jail in 2015. They didn't start renaming themselves from he to she until 2017. They weren't even going under the knife yet, or, they were just rearranging pronouns. And like I said, how this person looks right here, this is how he still looks now. This is a recent picture of him. It doesn't look like much has changed, because I saw another picture of him that was an older picture where he had shorter hair, which is probably from a few years ago. He still looks exactly the same. The only difference is here, his hair is longer. The world we live in. But then again, look at what state this happened in Iowa, where I'm sure that the population for melanated people is like probably below 5%. But y'all let me know what y'all think about this absolutely ridiculous yet dangerous. It is dangerous. It is a dangerous story at its core. Down in the comments below, like, share, subscribe. Make sure to follow me on Twitter if you haven't done so already. Have your notifications turned on, and I will talk to you in the next one.